This program is made possible in part by the Moving Image Trust Fund.
Hello again, everyone, and thank you for joining us. In at least some circles, Frank Abagnale was legend well before those first incredible years of his life were put to film. In the wonderful motion picture, Catch Me If You Can, was depicted those 6 fantastic years of his late teens and early 20s when a keen intelligence and a theatrical flair helped him pose as a doctor, a lawyer, an airline pilot, even an FBI agent. Along the way, those impersonations were often central to the multiple financial frauds that put untold thousands of dollars in his pocket. And along the way, there were several arrests, 2 escapes, 2 imprisonments on 2 continents, and then a career as a consultant, helping financial institutions avoid fraud and assisting law enforcement in detecting and preventing fraud. And in recent years, Frank Abagnale has concentrated on advising individuals, especially senior citizens, on how to avoid becoming victims of financial fraud. And that is what brings him to Arkansas at the invitation of the Arkansas chapter of the American Association of Retired Persons. Frank Abagnale, thanks very much for making this time available.
Pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
Your work in recent years, as noted, has tried to highlight the vulnerability of all of us as consumers to financial fraud. And though we can read about firewalls and we can read about countersigning and security checks and all that, are we more vulnerable than we were, say, 5 years ago?
Oh, absolutely. You know, I've spent 41 years teaching at the FBI Academy, so I have always dealt with crimes against the federal government, corporations, financial institutions. I've written a lot about consumer crimes in some of my books, but this was the first opportunity when AARP approached me about 3 years ago to actually go out and educate people about the scams perpetrated against the elderly and young people as well, by telephone, by email, by the internet, and to help educate them, as you do in business, you educate people how not to fall victim to frauds in the same way with individuals. If you show them what their risks are, you explain it to them, you tell them how the scam works, they're smart enough next time they get that call, they get their email to do something about it. The truth is the majority of people are honest, and that's great. And because they're honest, they don't really think in a deceptive way. So, you know, if the phone rings and it says on the caller ID it's the Internal Revenue Service or the Little Rock Police Department, they believe that's so. They don't know that you can easily manipulate the caller ID. So once you teach people that, they go along and learn how to protect themselves a lot better. So this has been a unique opportunity for me over the last 3 years to kind of switch gears a little bit and concentrate on crimes against consumers and individuals.
Well, recognizing that the ground shifts in financial fraud fairly often, what's the number one threat as you look at it today?
Well, the internet is the biggest threat. You know, the internet, as we all know, was designed as an academic tool to send papers from one professor to another professor. We made it into a security device, and now we do all our financial business, all our private business, all our banking on something that is not secure, never has been secure, and is not secure today. So consequently, that has opened the door to criminals all over the world to defraud companies and individuals and corporations and do it from thousands of miles away. So in most cases, we find that these boiler rooms are not even located in the United States. They're in Malaysia, they're in India, they're in Hong Kong, they're in China. So we really don't have the ability to actually go pursue them, arrest them, take them into custody. So the only other answer is to use education to prevent those people from being victimized by those individuals.
Well, what's step one in self-protection then?
I live by a simple rule, and the rule is to stop, verify. So if I get a call tonight and the phone rings and it says that it's the Little Rock Police Department, I pick it up and it says, "This is Sergeant O'Reilly. We arrested your grandson." They tell you the grandson's name, what kind of car he was driving, the license plate number of the car, who was in the car with him, which is a girlfriend that you know. And they basically say they've arrested him for drunk driving. If he doesn't post bail by the next couple of hours, he'll have to spend the weekend in jail. He asked us not to call his parents. He asked us to call you. Are you willing to post the bail? Well, yes, of course. How do I do that? Well, you can just give me a credit card number and we'll post the bail. So the red flags are always, everything has to be immediate and involves money or personal information. The minute those things come into play, that's when it's time to stop. Now, where they get all their information to give them the credibility is social media. So they've gone to the child's Facebook and they've learned his girlfriend's name, what kind of car he drives, where he goes to school, his name, his parents' names. And they use that as for credibility on the phone, that you have to believe this must be real. They know everything they're saying is accurate. And then that's going to come up about, give me the money. If you actually said to them, well, look, can I just drive down there and post a bit? No, you can't do that. You have to do it with a credit card. The minute they tell you anything's immediate, you have to give them money or you have to give them information, that's when all I ask people to stop there, hang up the phone, pick up the phone, go to the phone book, look up the Little Rock Police Department, call them and say, I just got this phone call from a Sergeant O'Reilly who said, we don't have anybody by the name of Sergeant O'Reilly, and that's called a grandparent scam, so do not fall for that. We would have never asked you to send money by credit card. That's just a scam. That's all it takes is a couple of minutes to verify whether it's true or not.
Yeah, and you just touched on something there. We go to the phone book and a lot of people don't have phone books anymore. We're utterly dependent on cyberspace, on our computers.
And if we're depending on the internet, yeah, we live in a too much information world, there's no question about that, but it also can be helpful. So there I can go to the computer and look up the Little Rock Police Department and get their phone number if I can't do it through the phone book or through information or wherever it might be. Yeah,
and the ease with which it can be done. I started to say when you were talking about all the information that a scammer would call a grandparent or that, you know, these guys are women, they're good. I mean, they've got a lot of data. But the fact is, as you describe it, they can get on any social media platform and maybe in 10 minutes get everything except your blood type, and I'm not sure about that.
Absolutely. If you talk to a real, true scam artist or hacker, they will tell you that I only need the person's last name and their zip code, and I can find out anything about them. And that's because we live in a way too much information. Well, now, I'm not on social media, but I'm the father of 3 sons, the grandfather of 5. Obviously, they like social media. So as a grandparent and as a father, I've always taught them to use it wisely and how to use it properly. Unfortunately, a lot of young people don't use it correctly, and they give away way too much information, as do too many adults. So I saw an email the other day that simply said, "Hi Karen, great having lunch with you today. I hope you and your husband Robert have a great time at Disney World with the kids. When you get back, let's get together for lunch again. By the way, I meant to tell you about this YouTube thing I've seen. Click on this link and watch it. I think you'll enjoy it, Barbara." Well, she just had lunch with her. So she thinks, well, it must be her. But that's how much they go to research to give them that instant credibility. So you can't rely on the fact that it's really your friend sending you that email. You need to check that email address and see if it actually, in fact, came from that individual.
The financial industry, commercial banks with retail customers such as myself, would seem to me to be doing everything they can to get everyone to go electronic. Don't want to handle checks anymore, don't want to handle paper. That creates a kind of rub for the consumer. I mean, you've got the institution, the bank, that doesn't want to handle paper. You've got a consumer who doesn't particularly want to handle paper, can save 48 cents on a stamp and the price of a check with a click of the mouse. Bang.
You're absolutely right. And I'm a little bit old school there. I'm not of that school of thought. We have all the problems, for example, with the IRS. We had $5.7 billion in tax refunds given to individuals that weren't even living in this country who filed for a return using electronically somebody else's Social Security number. Now this year the IRS has done a little better. In 2016 they only paid out $3 billion of the taxpayers' money in fraudulent claims, but they stopped $32 billion in attempts from actually going through. When we filed by paper, they actually got the physical return. They waited for the W-2 to come from the employer to match the W-2. Then they looked at the return, they examined it, and you waited maybe 8 weeks or so to get your money. Then they decided, no, we're going to do this electronically, and then Congress says not only do you have to do it electronically, but you have to make sure that people get their money within 4 weeks. So their IRS is saying, look, I can't match all of this information. I don't even get the W-2 from the employer to match it. So I'm taking the word of the person that's sending it in that they did make this much money, they did work at this company, and I'm paying a return that I've had no time to investigate. So it's a little fault of the government as well. But again, we left paper, which was very secure. This is why you're starting to actually see checks come back. Checks are making a return now because people feel a little more comfortable writing a check. They can track a check. They can stop payment on a check. They have to mail the check to a physical address. Someone has to actually deposit it into a legitimate account. So I know that in the state I live in, South Carolina, 2 years ago, because they had 3.7 million people in South Carolina had their identity stolen by a hack into the tax revenue office. Now they've actually started making refunds back by check again, so they don't do them electronically. So I think we're starting to see a slow turn back to that, because it's so easy to do anything that you do mobile, wireless, or electronically, that anyone can easily intercept that.
Well, I've been the target, personally, I've been the target of ridicule from friends because I write checks, I don't do electronic banking. Right. Am I a troglodyte?
No, I write checks. I don't do online banking. I don't trust online banking. I certainly wouldn't do mobile banking on a mobile phone. So I'm a little old-fashioned just like that. I write checks. Now, I will tell you this, I'm careful about who I write checks to. So I write a check to pay my mortgage, I write a check to pay my car note, I write a check to pay the insurance company. But the problem also is if I were to go into CVS tomorrow or a drugstore and write a check for, say, $9, I have to hand the clerk the check. And on the check is my name and address and phone number, my bank's name and address, my account number at that bank, my routing number into that account, that's your wiring instructions, my signature on the signature card at that bank, and then the clerk has written down my state driver's license and my date of birth. Well, I don't get that check back. We live in truncation, so I get an image of the check. The physical check goes to their warehouse, and in 65 days they destroy it. But anyone who would see the face of that check could actually draft on my bank account, they could wire money out of my account, or they literally could turn around and basically go to checksinthemail.com, look for checks that look like my check in the same design, order those checks with their name on it, but my account number.
Right.
So every check they write debits against my account. So I'm a little careful about who I write checks to, but I still write checks.
You're scaring the daylights out of me and everybody who's watching this program. What's our level of risk overall? Is there, in this culture, in this commercial culture, in this cyber climate of ours?
Well, there's a great deal of risk. You know, we're making a big thing about Equifax, and it certainly is, but I remind people that in 2016, we had 1,206 breaches that took 1.7 billion identities during that 12 months. We had to add 2 more recently, 3 weeks ago, because the SEC, the Security Exchange Commission, admitted they had a breach in 2016. So we added them. And then a week later, Deloitte said they had a breach they didn't tell us about, so we added them. We're now into November of 2017. We've already had 1,103 breaches, and we haven't finished the year out. The big thing about Equifax is the fact that they stole your name, they stole your social security number, and they stole your date of birth. You can't change your name, you can't change your social security number, you can't change your date of birth. So they will typically hold that type of data, or what we refer to warehouse it, for the next 2 or 3 years before they ever bring it out into the marketplace. It's not going to come out in the next year or two. They typically hold that type of data for 2 to 3 years before they release it. When you breach a Home Depot or a Target and steal credit card numbers and debit card numbers, you have to get rid of that right away. It has an extremely short shelf life. But if I steal your personal information, I can hold on to that information. So we had that breach in South Carolina 3 years ago. We are just now starting to see some of those identities being used on the dark web and being sold. Sometimes criminals will take that information a little earlier and use it for government benefits, because governments do not use credit bureaus or credit reports. So if I apply to the IRS for a tax refund, or I apply to Medicare or Medicaid, they don't use credit bureaus. So they can use that to get benefits in my name, but most of the time they will warehouse that information for 2 or 3 years. So offering me 1 year of credit monitoring service is just a way. Nothing is going to happen in a year. Even the dumbest criminal realizes you just gave everybody a free year of credit monitoring, so they're not going to do anything with your information for a year. And let's keep in mind that whatever number they initially give you, 145 million identities stolen, that's the initial number. I'm sure that's going to turn out to be about 250 identities that were stolen during that Equifax. They originally said 1.3 million driver's licenses. So far they're up to 10.6 million driver's licenses. So it's going to be a lot higher than they initially told us.
Well, and at the core of so much of this, anyway, you right, is the relative ease with which a hostile party or anybody can obtain their social security number.
Absolutely, and that's,
we're loose with it, are we not?
We're not only loose with it, but then I've learned one thing. I've been dealing with breaches back to TJ Maxx some 15 years ago, and one thing I've learned for sure is that every breach occurs because somebody in that company did something they weren't supposed to do, or somebody in that company failed to do something they were supposed to do. Hackers do not cause breaches, people do. So what happens in the case of South Carolina, an employee took home a laptop they weren't supposed to take home. They were in an unsecure environment, the hacker got in. In the case of Equifax, they didn't update their infrastructure security. They didn't fix the patches they were supposed to fix. So they opened the door for the criminal to get in. You know, a bank like Chase Bank in New York spends about $500 million a year on technology every year to keep people and criminals out of the bank. However, they employ 200,000 people. So they're just waiting for one person to make a mistake and open that door. And once they get in, they're able to do that. We have the technology to keep them out, but technology is only good if you use it, and the people that are in control of it are handling it properly.
And only a couple of days ago in the New York Times, it was reported that the National Security Agency, the NSA, had been hacked, profoundly hacked, and some of its tools stolen, and which are now being used by foreign, even hostile governments against us. Where's this end?
Again, so 4 years ago, the Office of Personnel Management had a breach. They didn't make it public, so a team of people went in and said, look, you have a lot of loopholes here, you need to fix these things, and here's a list of things you need to repair. A year later, almost to the day, they had another breach. So that same team went back and said, you know, we were here a year ago, did you fix these things or any of these things on the list? No. And they warned them that you were going to have a major breach. Well, then they had that breach. 21 million federal government employees, former government employees, government contractors, have had their identities stolen by the Chinese government, including more than 10 million fingerprints of those government employees. It didn't have to happen if people had done the right thing. So that was a case where they failed to do what they were supposed to do. So, you know, during the month of October is Cyber Awareness Month. This week is International Fraud Awareness Week. So I spend most of my time at companies. Yesterday I was at AIG in New York at their corporate headquarters, streamed out to all of their employees around the world to talk to them about the importance of their job. And the most important part of their job is to keep the information that's been entrusted with them safe. That's their number one job, whether they're the janitor or the CEO.
Seniors, it would appear, are, is it fair to say, especially vulnerable?
Well, in many cases. Now, at AARP, they did a survey a couple years ago jointly with Microsoft, 6,000 people, and they found that millennials were more apt to fall for the scam of, I need to fix your computer, there's something wrong with it, you have to let me in.
Well, I love it in a way, but go ahead.
So they kind of fell for it. I think they do pick, these boiler rooms around the world tend to pick on elderly folks, and they tend to, again, use all these different scams. That all these scams you see today that I wrote about 20 years ago, 30 years ago, are the same scams today. There's just a different method of delivering it. Where 30 years ago you had to be a con man, you had to be the well-dressed, well-sophisticated, well-spoken guy. You had to sit down with the individual and scam them out of their money. Today, there's no such person like that because these people were sitting in a kitchen with a cup of coffee on their laptop in Moscow, scamming you. They don't see the victim doesn't see them, there's no emotion involved. It's strictly trying to rip you off. So these boiler rooms are just talking to somebody on the phone or emailing somebody on the phone. So that whole thing has changed a lot. It makes it easier for the criminal to commit it. It's a lot safer for the criminal. And unfortunately for the victim, they're falling for these things over a device, by whether it be a phone or whether it be a robocall or whatever it might be.
And decades ago, when you were making your bones, so to speak, but you told the Wall Street Journal not long ago, it is 4,000 times easier to pull off a scam today than it was.
Absolutely, because I didn't have the technology they have today. So a simple example of that is, like, for me to print checks, I actually needed a printing press. I had to spend 8 months learning how to operate the press. But there were color separations, there were negatives, there were plates, there were typesetting. Today you just sit down at a computer, you bring up a check on your diagram up on the screen, and then you pick a company in Arkansas and you grab their corporate logo, you put it on the check, and you put their corporate address in, you put a nice background in there. Then you basically, all you have to do is make a couple of calls, because we live in a too much information world. So if I call the company and I ask for someone in accounts receivables, I simply say to them, hey, I'm getting ready to pay this invoice you sent us, we prefer to wire the money. They immediately tell you, we bank at this bank, on what street, city, routing number, account number, everything you need to put on the check. If you hang up and call back and ask for their corporate communications and you say, hey, could you send me a copy of your annual report? Sure, we'll mail it out to you tomorrow. On page 3 is the signature of the chairman of the board, the CEO, the CFO, the treasurer, the controller. You scan it, white paper, black ink, and put it on the check. The technology has made it a lot easier, and the way that you can reach now millions of people all over the world with just an email or a phone call has made it much, much easier than when I did it.
Yeah, as you put it, a felonious geek in Beijing.
Absolutely.
Now, well, and real estate scams now, in terms of wire transfers, you've got not equity money, but
right. So
escrow money.
Right, escrow money. So last week in Chicago, I was speaking before the National Realtors Association, and they were up in arms about this scam is being perpetrated everywhere. It's just taken off like wildfire. And that's simply where you maybe just sold your house, you made $200,000 on it, you're a young couple, so you're going to buy a new house, and you're going to put that $200,000 down. So you did all the paperwork, and whether you're using a law firm or whether it's the bank, all of a sudden you get an email. It says, hey, we need your escrow money, route your escrow money to this, here's the routing information. And they immediately go send the money, and it's not from the bank, and it's not from the attorney. And then that couples out $200,000. Their down payment's gone. And who has the liability? Is it the liability of the bank? Is it the liability of the individual because they did something they shouldn't have done? Then that comes into question. But that is now becoming a very popular scam. So I told the realtors, as I would tell bankers and any attorneys or law firms, that you have to educate your customer. So it's your position and your place to say to the customer, now look, as we go through this closing, there will be a time when you have to pay escrow. Do not pay escrow to any email that does not get a phone call directly from me, or I directly send you the email and you call me to verify before you send the money, because there is a scam going on. This is how the scam works. Now, once people know that, they're going to say, well, I got this email, but I heard there's a scam going around, so I'm going to make sure I verify this is the right thing to do with the money. But if you never heard of that scam, you would naturally say, oh, well, they want me to wire the money to this account.
So it would fall to the legal community, the real estate community, the financial community, to be proactive with their clientele.
Absolutely. And I believe that's very important. Education is the most powerful tool to fighting crime. I've always said that during my whole career. And what's great about, what I like about working with AARP, and I've been to 10 states every year for the last 3 years with them, and thousands of people come to these presentations, but what I like is that there is no fee. You don't have to be an AARP member, and they don't allow anything to be sold at it. It is strictly an educational program for people to come and learn about these scams and how they work, and then what to do, being proactive to make sure that they don't get taken. And that goes a long way to keeping people safe.
Yeah, and for the very youngest, those who are starting out with their iPhones, which they can't seem to get out of their hand or won't put down or whatever, they're putting more data in there than they know.
Absolutely. There's three things to remember on social media. You never want a straight photograph of yourself on social media. By that I mean a driver's license photo, passport photo. Those are easily taken and then used for identity to say that they are you. So you don't want a straight photograph of yourself, and facial recognition tools like PitPat and Find a Face are simple tools that are available online that can bring me to your Facebook page just by taking your picture. It'll search those Facebook pages and bring me to your Facebook page. And if you happen to tell me on your Facebook page where you were born and your date of birth, then that's 98% of me stealing your identity. So I always tell young people, you can have a photo, you have a photo of you and your dog. You have a photo of you and your friends. You're playing a sport figure, you're playing baseball. And never, ever tell anyone on Facebook where you were born and your date of birth. Otherwise, you might as well say, come steal my identity.
Yeah, we've created something, haven't we? Kind of a monster.
Yeah, I think Facebook, and I've said this many times, is going to turn out to be kind of like Bitcoins. It's going to be a bad thing. And in the end, there's going to be a big bust. I mean, when you have 2 billion people, you have changed the psychology of the way people think. And they are so tied in now to Facebook that I think in the end, Facebook is not going to be a good thing. It's going to end up being a bad thing.
Frank Abagnale, thanks very much for being with us. Thank you for your time.
My pleasure. Thank you.
As always, thanks to you for watching. We'll see you next time.
This program is made possible in part by the Moving Image Trust Fund.